Well, hey, we are jumping into, you know this already, but we're jumping into a conversation specifically about parents in many ways. A conversation this morning in a series of conversations that we're calling The Rents. Everybody say The Rents. There you go, short for parents, for those of you who, I don't know, aren't cool like me and think of short words to say things. I'm being sarcastic. Literally, I went to title this series and I was like, I don't know what to call it. We're just going to call it Parents. Let's make it shorter. Cool, done. All right, in this series, I'll tell you though, we're talking about what it looks like specifically to live with a season of influence in the life of the next generation. Knowing that we get temporary influence there, but the influence that we have will lead ultimately to a permanent impact in their life. I mean, you know this if you're a parent, right? The conversations that you have with your kid today are shaping your kid for the rest of their life. If you're a grandparent, you know that the interactions that you have with your grandkids today are shaping those kids for the rest of their life. If you're a relative to a kid, you know this. And even if you're not a parent, even if you're not a grandparent, even if you're not a relative of it to a kid, right? I would be willing to bet that in some way, shape, or form, there is a group of kids or a kid who your heart bends towards, who you get a season of influence in the life of. You get a period of time, just a window to pour into them. And you want to make the most of that because you know that you only get that window for so long, but ultimately their life will be shaped by what you do with this window. Now, I'll tell you, for me, I've been a parent for almost 7 years, which means I'm far from an expert in this conversation. But I will say that one of the things that I have learned to love about parenting, and some of you have experienced this, I love being able to see the world through fresh eyes, like for the first time again. I mean, things in our world that I just became accustomed to and were just became normal for me, and I don't even notice anymore. The way that my daughter just kind of experiences those for the first time and sees them for the first time, it just reawakens things in me, and many of you have had experiences like that. Last year, my daughter was about 5 years old. We were at the park down in White Bear. And we're going for a walk. And we're walking, and there's this lady who had been going for a walk as well, who we didn't know, but we'd seen her. She'd been going for a walk as well. And then she, I guess, just got tired, and so she decided to lay down, and she just decided to take a nap. I mean, she decided to just kind of find a place to just lay down. And I guess she's a stomach sleeper, you know what I mean? We all got our own positions that we prefer, you know? She's a stomach sleeper. She just laid down, takes a nap. She is, I had to point this out and run through, she is actually wearing shorts. It's just that the picture's so blurry. And the shorts are just the right color, okay? But she's actually wearing, she's fully clothed. Okay, she's taking a nap in the middle of the park. Now, we walked by there, me and my daughter, we see her laying there. We went to another park that was just down the road. We walked there, and then 20 minutes later, we turned around and we walked back. Now, as we're walking back by, it just so happened that this lady decided that it's time to wake up. So she gets up from this nap, you know what I mean? And I just look over at my 5-year-old, and I said, she woke up. And my 5-year-old whips her head around, looks over, and she looks back and she goes, "Oh, I thought she was dead." Now, remember, it had been 20 minutes since we had walked by, and my kid didn't say a word. I mean, we just strolled on through like this is a normal day in the life in Wyoming, Minnesota. You know what I mean? Just moves on through. And for me as a dad, I tell you, you know this, for me as a dad, that moment became one of many what are called, teaching moments in the life of my kid. Primarily teaching, if you see someone you think might be dead, maybe tell a grown-up, like just mention it to somebody at least. Now, if you're a parent, you've experienced a number of teaching moments in the life of your kid. And if you're not a parent, I'm willing to bet that you've experienced a number of teaching moments in your life. Now, I'll say this. You spend 18 years pouring in and making the most of all of these teaching moments because you feel like you've got a window of time that you need to make the most of, and you feel like you need to teach your kid everything you possibly can to set them up for life. And so you spend these moments, you take advantage of every one of these moments as much as you can to pour into them things like social skills. You know what I mean? Like how to meet other people, how to have conversations with people, how to interview for a job in person, you know what I mean? Like, for me, I didn't grow up with a whole lot of social skills, I don't feel like, so I'm just, trying to hope my kid doesn't turn out weird, just be normal a little bit when you're out, just whatever, but you just try to, give them everything you can to give them the ability to interact and connect With other people, you try to pour in life skills for them, right? You want them to know at least how to study a little bit, how to manage their money, how to care for their car, how to negotiate when they need to negotiate. I mean, you want to give them as many life skills as you possibly can to help them navigate through the world around them. And then most importantly, you want to pour in ethics and morals, right? You just want them to turn out at least, even if you don't get social skills, at least just be a good person, And in fact, some of you, the reason that you started coming to church was because you wanted your kids just to learn some ethics and some morals because you hoped that they would grow up to be a good person as well. And there's so many things that you work to teach your kids, so many ways that you try to pour into them and give them what they need from moment to moment to moment to moment, hoping that all of those moments will add up to the kind of person that you would hope that they would become by the time that they turn 18. Now, I'll tell you, it can be difficult, right? It's hard to teach someone who's not you, doesn't think like you, doesn't see the world the same way you do, doesn't experience it the same way that you have. It's hard to pour into kids like that. And so we have all these teaching moments, and like good teachers, right? We try a variety of teaching methods, right? I mean, you just try to pour and try anything you can, try a variety of ways and tactics and approaches just to pour into them. We try all kinds of methods, right? Like the repetition method, one that I use often, right? You know what the repetition method is? It assumes that if they didn't hear it the first time, it's probably just they didn't hear it enough times, So the repetition method sounds like, hey, how many times do I have to tell you that if you run down the hallway, eventually you're going to find a corner really fast, Try the repetition method. We try the volume method, right? The volume method just assumes if you didn't listen the first time, it must be that I just didn't say it loud enough, It's a favorite for me at home at times, right? We try the vision method. The vision method assumes that, hey, the gateway to the ears is through the eyes, right? Look at me, look at me, look at me. We try, this one's fun, the unquestionable method, right? Like we just present ourselves as the expert who can't ever be questioned and could never be wrong, who can make no mistakes, right? Find ourselves frustrated in moments and being asked why they have to do something. You say, because I said so, yeah. Or my favorite, this is my favorite, the last one, and this one, I'll be honest with a disclaimer, this one only works for a few years, but I call it the make it up method, okay? This is the one I probably use the most in the first 5 years of my kid's life. I overused this with my 3-year-old when I was trying to convince her that not every boo-boo was a medical emergency, And so she'd have pain, and I would just make up ways to magically make pain disappear. I actually convinced her for a couple of years that I was a doctor, and I don't mean sort of an actual doctor. You know what I mean? We could be at the park playing with strangers, and a stranger's kid gets hurt, and my 3-year-old, 4-year-old could be calling across the park to me, Dad, get over here, because you're a doctor. You know what I mean? It only works for so long, but man, I used it as long as it would work. Listen, you do everything you can, use as many methods as you can. You probably have a list that's way better than this. But the reality is, and if you've parented for more than a day, you know this, you can be the best parent and the best teacher and the best trainer and the best developer and the best coach in the world. But at some point, it still begins to break down. And at some point, you still feel like everything that you're pouring in still won't be enough. And there's a few reasons for this. We'll just kind of hit them real quick. One of them is quite honestly, you know this, you can't make your kids listen. You could say all of the right things, but you can't make them hear it, right? Second thing is this, and if you're a teenager in the room, just cover your ears real quick before you say this out loud, right? But as a parent, you don't know everything. You know a lot, but you could never know everything that your kid needs to know before they leave your house. Quite honestly, you're still trying to figure out things in your own life that you feel like you need to know that you're not prepared for. You don't know everything that they're going to need, right? And even if you did, the reality is you won't always be there. I already grieved the day that this day comes. You can put that up there. I already grieved the day that this day comes for me, but there's going to be a day when your kid or kids turn 18, 19, 20. You'll move them into college. You'll move them into an apartment. At some point, they'll leave your home, and you won't be there for them. Or at some point, even if they're living in your home, they'll hit a certain age where they don't feel like they need you anymore. And even if you're there physically, relationally, it's not going to be the same. And the reality is, you won't always be there for them. I mean, you know this. You could be the best parent in the world, and even still, it wouldn't be enough. We could maybe say it this way. If that's the case, the next generation, what they need is something better than you, actually, and something beyond you. And if you're a parent, I'm willing to bet that you've felt that before. I'm willing to bet that there are nights where you've gone to bed just hoping that you got through to them, just wishing or hoping that you've done enough for them. Now, today we're going to dive into a moment in the life of Jesus when Jesus actually engages with the next generation of two different families at the same time. And those families actually discovered something that the parents could have never given their kids. It's this moment where Jesus is teaching by a lake. He's having this conversation. He's teaching people who have come and just kind of gathered to listen to him. Hey, do you guys mind doing me a favor? I'm sorry. Ask them outside to turn the music off if you don't mind. I think they're playing music for the after party. Just ask them to kill it if you don't mind. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. Sorry. It's just like this constant thump, thump, thump. Does anybody else hear that, or is it literally just me? Okay, great. All right, in the back row too. I'm like, maybe it's just me. You know, like maybe am I hearing things? What is going on? Okay, good. That makes me feel better. I'm like, okay, I'm not alone in this. All right. No, this is the moment where Jesus is actually teaching by a lake. And he's having this conversation with people, and he's sharing them really just kind of, he's introducing this new way of living to the world around them. And while he's teaching, the crowd around him actually gathers so much that he's actually starting to get tight. It's actually hard to communicate to all these people as they crowd in closer and closer and closer to him. And there's these two families that are by the lake while he's having this conversation. Actually, two families that run two different family businesses, fishing, who are there, and they all come in. They're kind of like done for the day. They're done working for the day, and they just happen to be there while Jesus is having this session, this teaching lesson with people. The two families represented really by two dads, one by the name of John, who had a fishing business, another man named Zebedee, who had another fishing business himself. Now, fishing businesses in this day and age are family businesses. Very common for them to pass the business down from one generation to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. Kids will be trained up and developed by their parents to operate and participate in and eventually one day run the business. And so John was training Simon and Andrew, boys who were probably in the range of about 15 to 25 years old. Zebedee, on the other hand, has his sons named James and another son named John. And they're doing everything they can, you would assume, to teach them how to run these businesses. You would assume they're teaching them when to fish, teaching them how to fish, teaching them where to fish. They had different nets for different depths of water that they would use to catch fish at different depths, different weights that they would put on the nets to hold them down. I mean, they're teaching them everything that they can to prepare them to operate these businesses and also to be able to provide for their families for years and generations in the future. And Luke, a historian, tells us that Jesus is teaching by the lake. And as he's teaching by the lake, all these people are crowding in, and he tells us that Jesus eventually just steps into one of the boats. It says Jesus stepping into one of the boats, looks at Simon, the owner of that boat, and asks him to push it out into the water. And so Jesus sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. He goes on, he says that when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." Now, Simon, if you read the text, Simon looks back at him in this moment, and he's like, "Teacher, we've been out all night. Like, we've tried. We just came back from a frustrating night of fishing, and we caught nothing. It didn't go anywhere. It left us empty. We got nothing to show for it." But he goes, if you say so, sure, I'll do it. And so he does. He goes out deeper and he casts his net. And Luke tells us that his nets were so full that he actually had to call James and John from this other boat to come and help him and give him assistance with this. And in fact, Luke tells us that both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. I mean, they're barely going to make it back to shore. They're holding so much in this moment. Now, as a dad, I'll tell you, this is be one of the proudest moments that I can imagine for a kid. I mean, if you've ever tried to teach your kid to fish, I would imagine this would be the kind of moment that you're like, my boy, you know? Or if you've ever watched your kid do anything that you would hope that they would be successful at, if you ever trained your kid to do anything that you would hope they would become successful at, this is the kind of moment that you would just be overwhelmed with pride and joy for them. You'd be looking at them and going, I taught them everything I know. You know, they look just like me. Now, This feels like what would be the culmination of parenting for a couple of dads. But for the 4 boys in this story, this was just a new beginning. In fact, Jesus looked at Simon. He said this. He said, Simon, don't be afraid by what you just experienced. It doesn't make sense to you. It's crazy to you, but don't be afraid of it. He says, from now on, you'll be fishing for people. In other words, you've learned how to fish for fish, but I could teach you a whole new set of skills in this life, in this world. And the author tells us that as soon as they landed, these boys left everything. They left 2 boats of fish to rot. They left their parents who taught them the family business. Left everything behind, and they did one thing. Followed Jesus. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus already, you kind of know the story at this moment, but let me clarify a couple things in here. Okay? This is 2 years before Peter would declare Jesus as the Son of God. This is 3 years before they would see Jesus killed and resurrected. And Luke looks at us, and Luke writes to us, he doesn't say that they left everything and immediately believed in Jesus. No. It doesn't say they left everything and immediately knew everything about Jesus. It tells us they left everything and followed Jesus. Now, my point is this, and we'll unpack this in a moment. My point is simply this. The greatest thing that you and I, as parents or as influencers in the lives of our kids, the greatest thing that you and I could offer the next generation is not a lesson to learn from us. It's a person to follow with us. Specifically, the person of Jesus. Now, let's talk about this for a second. The difference here is subtle. When we talk about learning and we talk about following, the differences here are really subtle, but they're massively significant, right? Learning is about information. Following is about an introduction to a person. Learning, we learn with milestones. In fact, my kid comes home with like report cards and with like these rubrics of like where she is on her grading level and math level and all these things. Like we have milestones for learning. Right? Following is about a continuous relationship. We talk about this for a second. Sometimes we kind of make the mistake of like creating milestones in the lives of our kids' spiritual journey. Some of us do this sometimes. We just tell ourselves, hey, the ultimate goal, if I could just get them to be dedicated as a baby, be baptized as a teenager, go on a mission trip. If I could just get them to achieve these things, then everything's going to be right for them. If we're not careful, we actually create milestones, and we celebrate the milestones without paying attention to the relationship in the process. Following isn't about achieving milestones. Following is about who you're walking with continuously and who you're walking with daily. Here's the hardest part. Lessons feel like they're within your control as a parent. I mean, you can at least say it to them. Following is out of your control as a parent. You don't have control over who they relate to and who they follow. It's risky, but it's reality. In fact, I'd kind of just say it this way. You can foster a relationship between them and Jesus, but you can't actually force them to follow Jesus. Some of you have felt, maybe even today, feel the tension of that. You wish your kid was engaging in a different way in their faith journey. You wish your kid was walking in a different direction in their journey, and you can try to foster it, but you know that you can't force it, and everything in you just wants to force it for them. You can't force it. You can foster it. So before we wrap up this morning, here's what I want to do. As we kick off this conversation about parenting, we're going to dive into the depths of this over the next 3 weeks. But as we kick off this conversation, I want to share with you 3 ways that I've seen that you can foster a relationship between your kid and the person of Jesus. 3 things that you can't force in their life, but 3 things you can do to foster the relationship. The first one is this. The first one is this. Create space for them to follow. Create space for them to follow. I was talking to my parents recently, And I was actually asking them, I've been picking their brain a little bit as we've prepared for these conversations. And they were reminding me about this moment in my life when I was in 6th grade. I remember this, but not the same detail that they do. In 6th grade, actually I was in 5th grade going into 6th grade. I had the chance to choose an elective for the first time, you know what I mean? I could do band or chorus. If you've ever heard me sing, you know I didn't choose chorus. I feel like there was a third one, and then a random one called exploratory, which was just a combination of a bunch of different things. Basically, if you didn't choose one of the first 3, you just signed up for exploratory. And I came home and I said, hey, I'm going to do exploratory. And my mom looked at me and she said, hey, why don't you do something else, like band or something? You know what I mean? And she kind of knew that I kind of was, I think, interested in music a little bit and kind of had a vibe for that. I was like, no, I don't really want to do band. She said, why don't you want to do band? I said, well, I don't know. They'd probably make me play something like the clarinet, you know? And I just didn't want to play the clarinet, you know? I wanted to be able to choose what I wanted to choose, but I knew that if you signed up for band, you had to audition for these different instruments, and they would tell you what you were going to play. So I don't want to play the clarinet, and they'd probably do that. Okay. She goes, listen, and this is what I appreciate. She could have in that moment said, hey, I think you're taking the cop out, dude. I think you need to do band. Instead, she looked at me, and I'm so grateful for this. She looked at me and she said, hey, here's what I want you to do. She goes, I want you to take 1 week, and I want you to pray about which of these electives that you feel like you should sign up for. And I want you to take a week and ask God to speak to you and talk to you about what you should do. And if you come back in a week and you feel like you should do exploratory, then sign up for exploratory. I'll sign the piece of paper. We'll send it into the school. It'll be great. But I want you to take 1 week. I want you to have some space. And I want you to engage this conversation with Jesus. So I took a week. At the end of the week, I came back and I said, you know what? I feel like I'm supposed to do band. So I checked the box. She signed the paper. I took it to school. I went to the tryouts. They sent a piece of paper home the next week letting me know what instrument I got placed on. You want to guess what I got placed on? Oh, yeah, they put me on that clarinet. Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, in that moment, let's be honest, as a kid, in that moment, if I had been forced to do it, do you know what the conversation would have been like when I came home? I'm not doing that. I'm sure there's a little bit of that. But the peace and the confidence of knowing that the step that I had taken was a step that I didn't feel like was something that my parents were asking me to do, something that my Heavenly Father was actually guiding me towards. Well, that changed everything in that moment. Now, we ultimately figured out how to shift instruments and all that stuff worked out. But a moment like that as a 5th grader, for a parent to look at me and say, hey, you got to decide, but I want you to take 1 week and pray about this. That's creating space. And so years later, remember this, I was graduating college. I had 2 different job opportunities that I was looking at, and I was trying to decide which job opportunity to take. Both of them were good and good for different reasons. And I remember a conversation, I can tell you where I was standing on my campus at the time. I called my dad, and I said, hey, Dad, I'm trying to process these 2 opportunities. I don't know what to do with it. Help me process this out. And I told him about the 2 different jobs. And there are a few different ways he could have gone in that moment. You know, he could have asked, which one is closer to home? Which one pays more? Which one's got more upward mobility? All which would have been great dad questions to ask. The kind of skills and lessons that every dad would want to teach their kids. I remember the question he asked me. He looked at me and said, hey, how do you feel when you pray about it? Now, I already knew the answer to that question because quite honestly, I'd already been praying about it. But the reason I'd already been praying about it as a 22-year-old was because as a 12-year-old, my parents were already creating space in my life for me to engage in a conversation with Jesus and open up the door for him to speak to me. You can't force your kid to follow Jesus, but one of the things that you can do is create space for them and step back at times a little bit and give them a little bit of room and time to engage in that relationship for themselves. Second thing you can do is you foster a relationship between your kid and Jesus is surround them with people who will show them how to follow. So now I asked my parents recently, I said, hey, how did you guys foster a relationship? The first thing that came out of their mouth were the names of other people that they introduced me to when I was a teenager at home. Here's the thing. We say all the time that it takes a village to raise a child, but the reality is also you as a parent in some ways get to choose or at least influence who that village is. And one of the best things that you can do is actually create relationships and sign yourself up for communities, engage in communities of people who are going to share your values and who are going to be following Jesus as well in front of your children and modeling that for them. In fact, people who are going to, your kids are going to look to one day when they're not looking to you any longer. You know this is a day where your influence with your kid gets less and less and less, and your voice gets quieter and quieter and quieter, and their desire to listen to you gets less frequent, and less frequent. In that moment, I want my kids surrounded with people and looking up to people who are also going to show her what it looks like to follow. I mean, this is why, and if you're a parent, you already know this, this is why the next-gen environments of our church look like this. And if you saw the pictures from student ministry before, they look really similar, right? Leaders sitting around a circle with kids, pouring into them and developing a relationship with them and talking about the same questions that they're asking them and modeling for them what it looks like to follow Jesus in their world. Now, listen, when my kid comes home and I ask her, hey, how was church today? Sometimes she remembers what they learned. Okay? But she always remembers Rachel and Michaela, who at times lead her small group. And honestly, I'm just as happy about that. Because there's going to be a time in her life where she doesn't want to listen to me. But if she's got Rachel and Michaela in her life, I'm way less worried. Because I know they're the kind of people who are going to foster a relationship between her and Jesus. One of the best things you can do for your kid is surround them with people who will guide them in the same direction that you would hope for them. Third and last thing you can do for your kids, let them see you follow more than they see you lead. It's interesting. We talk a lot of times when it comes to our relationship with Jesus, we talk about having a personal relationship with Jesus. And that's good. It's nothing wrong with that language. But at times, it turns our faith journey and our spiritual practices into private conversations and private moments, disconnected from the lives of our families and disconnected and out of sight of our kids. One of the best things that you can do for your kids is actually let them see you following Jesus. One of the foundational earliest memories for me as a kid growing up is walking downstairs and seeing my mom with her coffee in one hand and her Bible in the other. Just the sight of that was a cue to me. Some of the things we do in our house as a family, we talk about big decisions that we're making as a family, and we talk about the way we're praying about them. We talk about decisions around generosity. We talk about decisions around ministry. We talk about church. We talk about the people that we care about and the people that we're praying for. We do everything we can to model publicly and visibly in front of our kid what it looks like for us to follow Jesus. For some of us, one of the best things that you could do for your kid is to actually let them see that you don't have all of this figured out. To let them see that you don't actually have it all together. To let them see that you're actually leaning into and depending on someone greater than you. He's got strength way greater than you'll ever have and knows more than you'll ever know. This is why, honestly, for some of us, I believe as a parent, one of the best things that you can do is get baptized in front of your kid. The most impactful moments in the life of a family. It's for kids to actually look and watch their parents take a step that sometimes they don't feel comfortable doing because they don't want to be in front of people, right? But actually let your kids see you taking a step to follow Jesus in front of them. This is why for some of us, one of the best things that you could do as a parent, I believe, is sign up for Starting Point. For some of us, you go, hey, I'm not sure what my relationship with Jesus looks like today. One of the best things you do, create space for that because it will shape the way that you live in front of your kids. I'm reminded as we wrap up, I was reminded a little bit of the words of Paul that he wrote in one of his letters to the church. Paul wasn't a parent. He was never a parent. They're words that speak to me as a parent. I just want to maybe share them with you this morning. In fact, maybe let's read these together. If you're a parent, actually if you're specifically with a parent in the room, I want us to read these words together. If you would read these with me. Paul said, and you should, just as I. So I don't know about you, But as a dad, I love it when people compare my kid to me. Like one of the most like life-filling, like soul-enriching things that you could do for me as a dad is to like look at my kid and go, she looks just like you. She laughs just like you. She walks just like you. She thinks just like you. That's probably scary, but she thinks just like you. You know what I mean? She's just as silly and goofy as you are. She's just whatever. Like, what is it? One of the best things that you can do to fill my tank is to compare my kid with me. And at the same time, I don't want to be the kind of dad who assumes that I've got it all figured out. And I don't want to be the kind of dad who assumes that following me and looking like me is enough for her to move forward in this world. I want to be the kind of dad. I want to be the kind of parent who lives and leads in a way that acknowledges that I don't have enough for my kid. And it was constantly pointing her to the one who does.